The Philadelphia Eagles, our 2023 preview for the defending NFC champion Eagles. It's kind of crazy to consider the conversations we were having about the Eagles in July and August of 2022. I did a show with Barnwell where we talked about the people who had the most at stake heading in to this year, or maybe the widest outcomes. I can't remember how we framed it all. It's been a year. But Jalen Hurts was firmly entrenched in those conversations.
High variance things.
Yeah. The things that could really swing the season either way. You know, the guys that we really wanted some information about. That Bucs playoff game was so seared into all of our brains and what the Eagles looked like. And it was just so clear, even if they had done a lot of good things in 2021 and the tweaks they made on offense were smart and we had some faith in the staff, it was so obvious what they needed to do to get over the hump and what that gap looked like. And it was so quarterback centric. That game feels so far away now. And those conversations feel so far away now. The rest of the roster seemed prime for contention heading into last season. And we had this Jalen Hurts sized question. Now, a lot of that question has been answered. The guy got extended. He had the best game of his career in the Super Bowl. So that's the taste we have in our mouth heading into this season. And the rest of the roster is still pretty fucking good.
Yeah, when breaking this down, because we'll go offense, defense, the offense was kind of easy because it was just, I mean, not so much as like, there's some stuff I'm going to ask, but more like the personnel. I'm looking up and down. I'm like, I know all these guys.
It's the same. Yeah. Cam Jurgens literally is the only new starter on offense. That's it. Maybe the slot receiver. Maybe if old lady Zacchaeus gets some snaps. Like that's all of them. That's what we're talking about.
And Albert O sneaking onto this roster out of nowhere.
The running backs, obviously. I don't want to get too far into it, but like it's all minor changes. The main characters are the same. Yes. And even schematically, like they were such a good offense last year. We can talk about some of those tweaks, but it really is a team that we've gotten to know very well over the last 12 months. And I think we've all collected a pretty decent amount of respect for over the last 12 months. Yeah. So let's dig into the offense though. Okay. So what is the biggest question that you have about the 2023 Eagles offense?
It's how Brian Johnson steps in as a play caller and really the continued ascension of Jalen Hurts and what does this next year look like? Does he hit a wall? Do defenses figure him out? Or does he take another step? All he's done has gotten better every single year as a football player. That's amazing. That's remarkable. And it speaks to work ethic, his just football IQ, just accumulating as much positiveness as possible. So that's the best way I could put it. Cause it's just,
I can't remember. I somehow missed it in real time, but I was looking at something today and the quotes that he had after the Super Bowl were in there. And even the quotes he had after the Super Bowl were just so remarkably wise. And the guy is just, he has something about him. And we've talked about this so many times about how that kind of ineffable quality to who he is, I think has really fueled a lot of his success. But you almost forget it until every time you hear him open his mouth or you're exposed to him in any way, that's just who that guy is at his core. He's just incredibly impressive.
It just seems like a sweet guy. Like, I mean, I remember him on the Manning cast and like you could just tell they were kind of like, because the Mannings, especially on those Manning casts, they might have a red solo cup with them. And so they're kind of getting rolling when he comes on. I can't remember what game this is. It's probably their bye week. And he comes on and he's just so nice and just so like, just positive with every answer. And then Payne and Eli are starting to kind of jab a little bit. And then they realized, oh no, he's just like this. He's not going to roll that way with us. No, he's just going to stay
killer to him too. That's what I like about him is that he's very driven. He's very focused. And I think that led to a lot of the progress that we saw. So you look at the structure of the Eagles offense last year. Obviously, they're the most efficient run game in football, incredibly well-designed run game with Jeff Stoutland, one of, if not the best offensive lines in the league. And you have Jalen Hurts at the center of it. And it's just such a math flipper that really can allow you to dominate teams on the ground. The passing game was much more vertical than I expected it to be with A.J. Brown. And they just had that aspect to them that I really maybe wasn't expecting based on their personnel. So when you think about the recipe on the offense for them last year, and maybe the 2 or 3 little tweaks they need this year to stay ahead of the curve and stay ahead of defenses gaining ground on them, what do those look like for you?
To me, it's an increased diversity with maybe personnel. I think maybe just adding those tight ends. Just how they carry their roster is interesting. They only have 4 receivers, 4 running backs, 4 tight ends, which is
4 receivers is wild.
It is. And they were predominantly out of 11 personnel last year. And it's actually really funny because then Steichen goes to the Colts and they only have 4 receivers. So it's like trying to like, what these guys making up their teams right now. But I thought that was interesting. This team was dominant out of 12 personnel when Dallas Goedert was healthy, especially throwing the ball. Like they actually were this team's going to be able to run the ball no matter what. I am not concerned about their run game whatsoever, especially when Jalen Hurts is healthy. The running back room just with DeAndre Swift, Kenny Gainwell, Boston Scott, and then also with Rashad Penny, who is extremely talented. And with that offensive line with Jeff Stoutland, I think the run game, no matter what's going to be fine, but it's finding new ways to throw the ball. Not just living off the vertical stuff. How can we even lift the efficiency a little bit? Like
vertical stuff and RPOs. It was vertical stuff and then extension of the run game stuff, I think, made up a large chunk of the passing game.
And that was it. And so when they get into 12, you could see a little bit difference, like just a little different ways that they would attack defenses. I think that's really interesting because like there's some efficiency that they need maybe out of 11 personnel, because what you're speaking to right there, verticalness and RPOs. They're 19th in passing success rate out of 11 personnel, but they're about league average if you just look at the percentage. But then when they get into 12, they were second in passing success rate out of 12 personnel. I'm not including the Rams because they only did it like 20 times last year. They were over 6% better than league average, which is a huge percentage jump.
Do you know what their rushing success rate was out of 12 personnel?
They took a little bit of a drop, but it was
that's what's interesting.
47-ish, 46%. When usually they're hovering around 50. So
yeah, what's interesting to me is the give and take, because the 11 personnel run game, they dictate, right? Yeah. If you're an 11 personnel, teams can only play you in nickel, and they're with the way that they can change the math because of Hurts, they're just going to grind teams into dust. So if you're going to 12 and teams start playing you in base, your passing game probably gets a little bit better, but is your running game as mercilessly efficient as it would be out of 11?
When they got into 12, everyone played single high against them. So then they got single high with Devontae Smith and AJ Brown running go balls.
Maybe the benefits are worth it. Maybe they probably are worth it.
That's their trade-off, is that, okay, we'll just take the one-on-ones. All right, yes, we're not gonna be able to run, but the thing is, yeah, they took a drop off. They're still like top 10, top 8. It was like okay, they're
that
bad.
Give and take is probably worth it. In the end, in the aggregate, that's probably worth it.
So I'm just curious if they, not saying like, okay, they're going to live out this, it's going to be 50-50. It's crazy. Well, tight ends everywhere. I'm just saying maybe just an uptick, maybe just a little bit more usage in that personnel grouping, just diversify themselves. What's interesting, when they're in 11, that third receiver spot is just a low usage role. That is as role player as you can get in a passing
target funnel on that team is insane. I mean, it's those three guys, and that's it, because they don't throw the ball to the third receiver. They don't throw the ball to the running backs
or the second tight end. it's hilarious. And who's a low usage wonder? Zacchaeus. So it's either Quez Watkins or Zacchaeus.
He's used to that life, baby. That's what he did in Atlanta.
I was like, this guy, that's a great fit. Like, good job by that agent getting them there, because that's like just perfect for him right there. But
I just 2 targets a game, and they go for 25 yards each. He doesn't give a shit.
3 targets, 2 receptions, 2 first downs, 50 yards. That's how he lives. It's great. So they just have talent, and I just want to see the next step as Jalen Hurts as a player. Just my questions mark for him last year, which I think he got a little bit better at, which is attacking from the pocket, especially over the middle of the field. So just kind of, it's not the same, but a little bit similar to maybe what Burrow had to go through, not living off the explosive plays, but just finding some of those easy buns, the check downs that, like you just said, they barely target the running backs, just stuff underneath, finding the third option. They haven't had to do that yet. So it's kind of like, don't change it if it's not broken. But it's also something I just maybe want to see, as maybe that defense is clamped down, get a better feel, and maybe some luck bounces away from them, maybe on those deep balls.
Yeah, it was kind of back and forth, but I think the Washington game, specifically the first Washington game, you think to some of those 50-50 balls that they come down with, and then when those weren't going their way, the variance and what the offense could look like.
That's it.
DeAndre Swift's skill set is an interesting addition to this, even though we talked about him on the Lions preview. He's not the most refined, route runner, option route runner, things like that, but he's still dynamic with the ball in his hands. He still had 70 targets last year. I mean, the guy can do some stuff in the passing game. So
he's like Brandon Ayuk playing running back.
Oh, like just super explosive. How dare you? Brandon Ayuk is fantastic.
Route running's a little chaotic.
No, no, you're not doing this. You're not going to do this to Brandon Ayuk in my presence. Absolutely not. So that skill set, the way the whole running back room shakes out, I think that's obviously been a huge fantasy football question, but is also a real football question and what those roles end up looking like. A couple things to note. This is the 4th healthiest offense in the NFL last year. They got a ton of games from their big offensive linemen, the guys that you need on the field. If they get dinged up this year, what does that ultimately look like? Okay, so, and then a receiver too. Talk about they only have 4 receivers. AJ Brown has missed a couple games a year, every year of his career, essentially, until last year. So if AJ Brown plays 13, 14 games, what does this offense look like without him? So just things to consider when you think about what they looked like last year compared to what they could look like this year.
And that point is so huge because it's not so much like, oh, Devontae Smith can't be a 1. Like in this type of offense, he's easily, and he's damn good. It's just that the secondary passer catcher that everybody just
your 1 to your 3 is a pretty big drop off.
Huge drop off. So that is kind of what the issue is there, especially on the outside. How do you have to win?
And then Cam Jurgens stepping in for Isaac Seumalo. Cam Jurgens is an undersized center prospect. I mean, the reason that they were so interested in him is because he's a 1-for-1 potential Jason Kelce replacement. So if you have him in the drop back game going one-on-one against a 325-pound defensive tackle, that could be a held onto your hat sort of thing. So that change, I think, is important to consider in what that team could look like in that area of the offense.
They have 4 games a year against the Giants defensive line and the Commanders defensive line, who are beefy. I was going to say the Cowboys defensive line.
Same thing with Washington playing against the NFC East later. So
yes, but the Cowboys defensive line is more speed. So okay, but speed on speed. But I also like their 3rd-round pick, Tyler Steen. Had a good preseason, and they kind of bounced him around at guard and tackle. But it was nice that I think Jurgens is a good player, but I am interested because I thought he was center only. I didn't even know that he would have a chance to play guard.
I was a little surprised at that as well when I saw that when they opened training camp, he was getting the reps with the
first
team.
He stayed there. But so Steen just does have a chance and down the road. So it's kind of the talent drop off might be a little bit, but it's like they do have maybe a potential pivot point in case if Jurgens is, getting blown back or anything.
People do like their offensive line depth outside of even Steen. Fred Johnson is a guy that has some traits that people like. So if they get binged up on the offensive line, I think they could still be okay that this team builds that way, but still worth acknowledging that they were very healthy last year.
Every time one of their guys gets cut or anything, another team just swoops them up. It's never like their guys just hit it's hilarious. Every backup gets picked up by another team. They're like, yeah, sure. Yeah. We trust that. We trust this depth.
Last thing worth mentioning, even with Shane Steichen leaving and Brian Johnson taking over as the play caller, Nick Sirianni has a huge role in what that offense looks like. A huge role.
Makes sense.
And I remember I was talking to him at camp and do you think you'll have more influence and more of a role in the offense? He goes, it was pretty big last year. I think he wanted to subtly remind me that he does a lot of work and how the thing is shaped. And I was like, I got you. So
that's funny.
I do think that that's important to consider. This isn't a team with a CEO, defensive minded head coach, or somebody that's completely hands-on in the offense, changing out their offensive coordinator when they went to the Super Bowl last year. This is an infrastructure that has a lot of continuity to it. And it gives me a little bit more optimism about what that turning of the page will look like than it might in some other cases.
Yeah. I think what's in my head is just when Steichen took over, it was just such a jump in 2021.
Sure.
That
he's very good. Worth acknowledging.
It's like he did a lot. And it's just, again, we've now really kind of harped on this a little bit this offseason is everyone could play the same sheet of music, the same calls, but it's how you do it. How do you cover that piece of music? How do you call this call sheet? When do you sprinkle in what? So I'm not saying I have nothing on Brian Johnson. I'm not going to go watch old, Houston offense or anything like that. That's wild.
I don't think you need to.
Yeah.
I don't think
so. As a play caller, it's kind of like it's TBD, but he has done some nice things and he's been involved with some good offenses over the years, college and NFL. So that always kind of gives you a little bit more optimism. It's not like you're taking the quarterback coach from the 28th best offense and slapping him as the play caller. It's like he's been with some positive offenses.
Biggest question about the Eagles defense in 2023.
Same thing with the coordinator, but also just how the spine gets rebuilt, how the interior defensive linemen, the linebackers, and the safeties. And I like some of the answers. Some of the answers have potential, but there are some question marks. And I think it's the one huge thing with this defense was they rushed the passer like crazy, and they had some dudes getting after it. They still have most of those guys that got after the quarterback last year. What was it, 70 sacks? They
had 70 sacks. They had 13 more sacks sending 4 pass rushers than any other team in the NFL.
That's so crazy. And of course they added to it, their first round pick, both of their first round picks this year are adding to the defensive front. Jalen Carter could be a weapon. They are losing the gravedigger, Javon Hargrave, so you do have to mention that. But the one thing I do want to state as kind of just something to keep an eye on with that pass rush, because I do think it's going to be good, but that sacks number it's got to regress, obviously, because 70 is just ridiculous. But I got some math here for you guys. The conversion rate is on knockdowns, on QB knockdowns, is about 42%. Last year, this team had 116 knockdowns, according to True Media. There's some skewing depending on NFL or PFR, but whatever. On True Media, they had 160 knockdowns, which ranked second. So that's good underlying numbers. but they converted on 60%, over 60% of those knockdowns.
It's a great stat.
So if that converted at an average rate, which is 42%, not even saying below average, just saying league average over the last 5-6 years, I kind of looked into this, 42%, that's 49 sacks. So still great.
Which is still very good.
Still great.
But it's not historic.
It's not 70. Yes.
The stat that I threw out on our top 10 defenses show, value gain from sacks, EPA generated on sacks. The gap between the Cowboys and the Eagles at 1 and 2 was bigger than the gap between the Cowboys and the Saints at 2 and 20. That's how much value they generated on sacks last year. It's just not going to happen. So the rest of the defense, even if they're still the best pass rush in the league, they need better play or just as good a play from some of these guys that we're talking about. And there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of turnover at some of these positions. So I think maybe the equalizer here is that there is a chance, in my opinion, that their defensive coordinator got hired away to be a head coach and they upgraded a defensive coordinator.
Man, Gannon can't get away.
I asked a head coach this on my trip, a guy who knows both of them and knows how they are as coaches. And I said, if you could pick one guy to coordinate your defense, Jonathan Gannon or Sean Desai, who would it be? And he thought about it for like 90 seconds. And he was like, I honestly, it's close. Yeah. So it's not just upset Eagles fans that would be throwing something like that out there. It's not their rationalization that the Jonathan Gannon, again, last performance leaving a taste in your mouth is how it's coloring their analysis. I think Sean Desai does a lot of interesting stuff, and we have seen it in the preseason. Ted Nguyen, I think, did a really good job pointing it out in the preseason piece that he wrote on The Athletic earlier this week. They're using a ton of man coverage, and they're blitzing a bunch. And I think you'll see a lot of that. I don't know if you'll see crazy amount of blitzing when the star pass rushers are out there, but I do think that you will see more man coverage, significantly more than the Eagles played last year when they get to third down. I think you'll just see a more flexible defense that is not going to trot out the same blueprint every single game or close to the same blueprint every single game. Last year's defense for the Eagles just kind of did what they did. They were so good. They just kind of did what they did.
And it didn't matter who they played against.
Yes. And I don't think that will be the case this year. I think you'll see more variance in the plans that they have for specific teams and down to down. I just think that there will be more variety with how this team plays.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And that's usually the changing picture is how you get after quarterbacks. Like that's just making them hold that ball for an extra half second. That helps the pass rush too. I remember just even when you're talking right there, when he was the defense coordinator for the Bears and they were doing the interesting twists and games with their pass rushers, and they're doing some overload stuff, some 5-man front stuff, the 5-0 look stuff. So that is something that is got me curious about the defense. I want to see how it fits. But the other thing too is they got to figure out a way to stop the run. And
so that is the biggest concern, because even if they do some cool shit, and some of the numbers, the Bears ran man coverage on third down at a top 10 rate when he was the coordinator there. The Seahawks didn't last year, but I think that's more of a Pete Carroll thing than a Sean Desai thing. So I do think you'll see more man. But the one thing that carries over is the Seahawks, for all the differences we might see with the Eagles defense, were a very bad rush defense last year. And a lot of it, we talked about this in the Seahawks preview, was structural. So if those structures carry over to this Eagles team, do they continue to struggle against the run, especially with 2 new linebackers in there?
Yeah. And varied looks, you start getting varied play, because we talked about this with the Lions run game and the NFC North preview. We're talking about, is it good to have 8 different pitches if you're not really great at all of them? What if how you fit the front and how you fit the runs out of different looks too? Like, yeah, it's just question marks, because also just personnel, again, losing Hargrave, you're hoping more out of Jordan Davis, but Jordan Davis hasn't shown much as a pro. Dane and I talked about
pushed off the field last year by Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh.
Guys signed off the street. Yeah, I mean, yes, they have some pedigree to them, but still,
but my age.
But you're getting drafted in the lottery. Like, you got to be a plus player at the very minimum. You got to play snaps. You got to contribute to the game rather than just kind of disappointing, because there's times where I'm like, okay, he's gonna get on some undersized guy, even in the preseason. I'm like, okay, here we go, and then he's just leaning on him. And it's just, there's not a lot of dynamic play out of him yet. I'm not saying he's, dead and gone. It's like we should never talk about him. He's not going to be anything, but they need more. Like, he has to really contribute and take some big snaps for this team. I think Jalen Carter is extremely talented. We just got to see, he's a rookie, and you just don't know with these guys. And actually, in a weird way, I think Nolan Smith, their other first-round rookie from Georgia, it's really hard to narrow it down to Georgia, the Eagle defenders, is better against the run than the pass. And so in a weird way, I actually think he's going to help out with that if he gets into some looks, even if I don't think he's I don't know, maybe if they bring more blitzes, that's actually he's good for, because I think he's a good coverage guy. He's good against the run, and he's a good like sub rusher. I mean, secondary rusher. But I think people were kind of seeing his speed and his size and going, that's a 10 sack guy. It's like, I think he's more like that Bruce Irvin type. That's more like a 6 sack guy, good against the run.
Physicality. Yep.
Physicality, versatility, even if he might be a little undersized. So it's an interesting group, but the guys have to step up. The highly ranked guys, highly drafted guys with pedigree have to step up to help out this team. I think that's a huge, huge question.
I'm bullish on Jalen Carter. We'll talk about it in a second.
Oh, yeah.
But Javon Hargrave, I think people are forgetting like how good Javon Hargrave is. Just this idea that a rookie is going to step in, even if the guy could be a superstar. Javon Hargrave was 4th in the NFL among interior defensive linemen in pressures in the second half of last season. He's a star. That he got paid like a star, even at age 30. And I think Jalen Carter is going to be really good. But this idea that the Eagles pass rush is just going to step in and be as good on day one as it was at the end of last season, there's a little bit of projection in there, even if the guys slotting into those roles have true pedigree.
And this team, you know, we worry about the run defense, and Zach Cunningham is really good against the run, but he's also a huge liability in coverage.
They've downgraded at safety and linebacker. There's no way around that. No way around that.
I do like Blankenship a little bit though. But so with Cunningham,
the idea that he was their 3rd safety last year and he immediately was a starter from day one, unquestionably coming into training camp, like there's a little bit of a step down.
It is, but he's okay. But honestly, going from that to from CJ Gardner-Johnson, yada yada, all those guys. But
Marcus, I think well for them last year.
I think too. But I was just gonna say, it's just their run defenses we have question marks on. This team played with a lot of leads in fourth quarters too. So we haven't seen that really get picked at other than huge moments like the Super Bowl. But it's also just, you know, the Cowboys game. I'm remembering late in the season. That's a game that I just always kind of come back to as a team that actually got after this defense. So, you know, it's just they had a lot of advantageous situations. I think they benefit for some, you know, bumps in health and also just like finish on sacks and all that. So just there might be just some natural regression from this team, just talent and just some luck stuff.
Funny you should mention that. Let's get to our X factors for the Philadelphia Eagles. Who do you got?
Every new face on defense, including the defense coordinator and / Georgia defenders,
that's cheating. You can't name 8 guys as your X
tying factor. It all together. But yeah, it's just all the spine. It's the defensive spine, and just what we just talked about for 10 minutes. I just rambled on about, but that's the biggest X factor on this defense or on this team.
And Terrell Edmonds stepping in as a second safety for now. Sidney Brown was a 3rd round pick. They may rely more on young players in key roles than they have traditionally because of what those guys are going to be asked to do and just pure attrition at some of those positions. Mine is the corners. Darius Slay is going to be 33 in January. James Bradbury is going to be 30. Both of them played really well last year, but there was a chance that Darius Slay was going to they were going to move on from him this offseason. That didn't happen. Bradbury, I don't think they plan on having him back, but it was because the market was going to outprice them for him. So when it settled a little bit lower than they expected, that allowed them to make a play for him. But corner play, we know this. It can go up and down. And especially with guys that are getting a little bit
James Bradbury.
Yes. And James Bradbury got released by the Giants because they had to release him.
Yeah.
They did not want to get rid of James Bradbury. That was a financial thing. But yes,
no, I know that. James but he had a down year though. Even regarding
he absolutely did. He was available for 1 year, $7 million last offseason. Yeah. So that natural variance is worth paying attention to, especially if the pass rush is going to take even a slight step back in the number of sacks that they get. So the spine and I think the corners are both worth thinking about when you consider the peak of this defense and the ceiling of this defense this year.
But so we're saying spine and the corners, okay, but at least the edge rushers are good, guys.
The front you feel good about. Yeah, the front you feel pretty good about. Breakout candidate for the 2023 Eagles. Who do you got?
You're gonna die laughing. I was gonna say Jalen Carter, but that's the obvious answer. So I'm going Reed Blankenship.
That's my boy.
Yeah,
I know I can always expect the best from you.
So I remember I never even thought about I was going to talk about Blankenship, but then I watched their game. I watched that Cowboys game. I watched a couple other games, late season games where he had to play.
The Cowboy game where he got absolutely put in a blender by CeeDee Lamb. That's the game you watched.
Okay, yeah, but a rookie undrafted guy against CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, of course. But I just watched other games where he had to start, and then I talked to Dane in Prospects Pros. He brings his name up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to study this guy. The arrow's pointing up with him, obviously, but it's like I think he's gonna be solid, like more than solid. I think he's gonna be actually pretty good at that safety spot.
Calling your shot with Reed Blankenship. If this
two-way
one hits,
player,
You can trot this out in front of me for the next 10 years. I don't think he's going to be bad, but if Bree Blankenship's like a plus player, you can dangle this in front of me for a while.
I'm saying he's going to be at least a solid starter this year. Just what you're talking about with their defense being varied. I think he's a good two-way player. So I think he's a guy that would benefit from those types of things. Again, just saying solid starter here, guys. So if he ends
I've got one of these later in the show, so you're totally fine. Mine here is Jalen Carter because I'm not particularly interesting.
I try to avoid rookies, so I'm like, it's hard though.
But
it's
this
hard.
guy, he could have been the most talented player in the draft. He probably was the most talented player in the draft, and I think he landed in the right situation. And all the weirdness and everything that happened before the draft, I think that we may forget about that pretty quickly.
I think even if I think my high end expectation for him was Kevin Williams. That was my comparison. It's like, even if he's 80%, 90% that, it's like Kevin Williams got 10 sacks as a rookie.
He's a borderline Hall of Fame player. He's should be in the Hall of Fame.
So I'm just saying 80% of that is like pretty damn good. So he's a damn good player. I'm excited to watch him.
What is success for the 2023 Eagles?
Super Bowl, right?
Winning the Super Bowl.
You go to the dance and send the aging vets, the star vets, off on a great note, and go to the next chapter in Philly land. So I think it's easy.